thank you so much for joining us tonight, and what a wonderful thing to be able to celebrate all of you and return here in person. Just being here, every time there's another event like this where we've survived, it's really just a cause for celebration. I'm really excited to be here tonight to moderate a conversation between Zalman and Michael. This evening is dedicated to you and all of the great work that you've done. And the thing about being a person that gives back, that all of you here are those kind of people, you never know the ripple effect of the work that you do. You may see the people that you touch in the time that you're with them, and maybe someone that they know. But the thing about life is that there are a lot of things going on behind the scenes that we're never aware of. Most of the time, we're not really so much in touch with the behind the scenes. Occasionally, things that go on behind the scenes look very tragic to us, as we saw with recent news. But sometimes we get to see the lines connecting, the beautiful stories connecting. And I like to think of it as a wink from God when we get those moments. And so it's my pleasure to begin a story, or I guess a few different stories tonight. And Zalman is sort of the anchor in these stories. And so let's just dive in. Okay, so Zalman, I think most people here know, but Gift of Life is something that came to your life a number of years ago. So tell us how you got started with Gift of Life.
First of all, good evening. Good evening. Good evening, and thank you all so much for the incredible work you do. You make miracles happen every day. And on the way in, you guys some were recruited and asked, consider it after you hear our story, to get swabbed, so that one day you can make a miracle in someone's life possible. 25 years ago, I was at the Jewish Renaissance Fair. They used to have an event like that here in the Metro West area. And there was a table set up for the Gift of Life, and someone standing behind the table said, "Hey, would you like to come over?" Explain what it was. Just a little swab in your cheek, and maybe one day you will be a match for someone for bone marrow donation, whereas it's just really a blood infusion donation. And I swabbed. Back then, I didn't even have an email address, so I put down my phone number, my home phone number here in Livingston, and I put down my parents' phone number as a backup. And then didn't hear anything about it for 20 years. 20 years later, I received a call. They actually couldn't get a hold of me. They called my mom, who answered her phone unlike I didn't, and tracked me down to tell me that I was a potential match to save someone's life.
Thank you. All right, now Michael, let's bring you into the story. How did you get connected with Gift of Life? How did you find yourself in the situation of needing a donor?
Well, let me first say how humbled and honored I need Zalman for a lot of things. He literally turned me on. How humbled and honored I am to be in the presence of so many people that do so many great things. To use an old tagline from a very bad joke, a funny thing happened to me on my way through life. I developed a lethal form of lymphoma. With my wife alongside of me, I sat in front of a doctor that told me I'd be lucky to live a year. And I looked him in the eye. I said, "I want you to look at me. You're looking at the guy that's going to screw up your statistics." I didn't know that Zalman was going to be my compatriot in that fight. About 5.5 years ago, Zalman came into my life, and he came into my bloodstream. And that was the beginning of a new rebirth for me. In fact, when I had the transplant, they brought in a birthday cake, and all the nurses in the hospital sang "Happy Birthday" to me. And it was literally the beginning of my life, my new life as a transplant. August 9th, 5 years ago. So I'm coming up on what is supposed to be a pretty magical date for transplants. and most of what I just said is not my own thinking. I have become a victim of him inhabiting my body. I effusively praise him all the time for all the good that he's doing. I congratulate him on his dress. I tell him his hairdos are absolutely spectacular, and I have no control over the words that are coming out of my mouth. But I give up all that control because I've gained a brother. I've gained a greatly fulfilled life, and I am honored.
Everybody mentioned birthdays, and I want to mention two things. I mentioned this to you before. The Rebbe, blessed memory, once shared that the day you were born is the day that God said you matter. And every day, every year on your birthday, God says, I need you more. So here you are again, have another birthday to celebrate, because God has a plan for you and a mission for you, the difference you can make in this world. Now, I want to share one important part. You're on the receiving end, and I was on the giving end. And the Talmud says that when one gives, they receive so much more than the person that actually is on the receiving end. The giver gains so much more. And that is what has happened in my life. I've gained. I know you've gained, but I've gained so much perspective. And it really, really, if anybody has any questions about what it feels like, it's really, really not that bad. My family has a phobia of needles. And I sat for a few hours, they pump the blood out, they take out the white blood cells, they put it back in the other arm. It's really nothing. I mean, you save somebody's life for doing nothing. I told you had a chance to FaceTime with my parents today. They're the ones you should thank because they gave me my DNA. So I did nothing. I sat for a few hours. It was comfortable, actually. They give you good dinner and everything while you're doing that. So it's all worth it.
So Michael, you didn't meet your donor, your now brother, for quite some time. So when they first told you, well, first of all, when did you find that you had a match? What was that story like? And who did you picture was going to be donating to you?
Well, I'll answer the last question first. When I found out I had a donor, I was home, and I sent an email to all of my friends, and I told them I just found out who my donor was. He's 6'2", 225, runs the 40 and 4'3", and I undersold my donor. I was a trial lawyer for 50 years. And I used to think that the most nerve-wracking moment in my life was the time when the jury had gone out and you'd hear the toilet flush in the jury room. You knew that they were coming out with a verdict. That was the sign. They'd knock on the door, and the time between the flush in the toilet and the verdict was read was the most horrible time of my life. For 50 years. What overcame that was when I found out that it was a perfect match. 10 out of 10, there's 10 elements that they look for in the match. And I found out there was a 10 out of 10, but Zalman did it, 25 years ago? People's lives change. People pass away. People no longer are interested in going through the process. So I sweated out waiting to find out if this guy that decided to get swabbed was still going to show up on the phone to give his stem cells. And Zalman, like everything else in his life, when the call was made, he showed up and could be counted on. And I didn't find out it was Zalman until exactly 1 year passed. And after 1 year passes, they allow the recipient to give contact information to the center. And then that information is sent to the donor so that if the donor wishes to establish contact, it can happen. I sent my email in. I don't think 2 minutes passed. And this is Zalman talking, you have to understand. I get a call from him. We're down the street. He was literally in Miami at the time that I sent the contact information, and I saw him the next 2 days later, along with Tova, and we met for lunch, and of course he took me to a kosher restaurant and made me late tefillin, which I hadn't done since I was 13. it has been the beginning of a most incredible experience. To say that I'll never forget it is to say that I'll never forget it. It goes without saying.
But there's some more incredible parts to the story, right? We actually met, not realizing it. We figured out later in comparing notes. We had met just before your diagnosis. We had met for a moment in someone's home. I was asked to cover for Shiva, and here in the town, and I went over to the home. I came to the kitchen to introduce myself. There was this guy standing there. His wife was, come over, Rabbi. She saw that I was there for Shiva, catching White, Florida. We spoke then. I said, very nice to meet you, and out the door you went. And here, just before your diagnosis, we met, and that was God just winking, as you mentioned earlier. It was incredible.
So, is there anything else you want to say about this part of the story? And did we cover most of the details? So now we're going to move on to the second part of the story. Often the MC of an event is not one of the speakers, but I too have a Zalman story that I'd like to share tonight. My Zalman story started a little bit after he got swabbed and had his DNA saved for Michael to find later. My story is actually a spiritual story. My story started in Florham Park. We share a mall. Maybe you're already in that. We're just down the road. I was raised as a proud Jew, but when I was 8 years old, tragedy struck in my public school, and a father had killed his whole family, and I came into school in 4th grade when I was not even 9 years old, and I was hit with this very serious news. And I came home to my parents assuming that they must know why we're alive and why we exist. And they just kind of stared back at me when I asked them this question. And I spent the next number of years trying to forget about the fact that I realized that I didn't know why I was alive, and that was a hard thing to do. But I had a nice life other than not knowing why it existed. And I would, on and off panic attacks and on and off insomnia. And then one day, I met a teacher at an after-school Hebrew high right here in this area, and he got me started looking into my Jewish heritage as a possible answer to these big and weighty questions that had been plaguing me. And this teacher brought me to an event, and I met a young girl in public school at Livingston High, and there was this family that she used to go to for Shabbos. This family was called the Grosbaums. And as I was trying to figure out how to add more spirituality, more of a spiritual framework into my life, going to Pingree, if anyone here is familiar with that school, it's not a very Shomer Shabbos school, I would get away from the very not Shomer Shabbos life that I was living during the week, and I would go to this place with yummy challah and delicious cholents and cute little kids who grew up and have their own kids right now. And the Grosbaums and Zalman and Toba became a really important part of my life. So much so that when I went off to college and met my husband there the first day of our freshman year and got married a few days later, we had 7 blessings to say under our chuppah. And Zalman was one of the blessings we gave to because he was such an instrumental part in my life.
Toba, I just did on
Exactly. Do you have any memories of our time together?
Of course, I remember the Shabbat used to come over, you and your sister and your brother, your mother came, and then we finally moved up.
So we moved on to my parents next. My mother always had a much stronger connection to us. When we were growing up, she would say things to us like, kids, do you want to become kosher? And we'd say, what does that mean? And when she would list everything we couldn't do, we were like, horrible idea. But she always had this spark connected to Yiddishkeit. My father, on the other hand, was not the most connected to Judaism. He was a proud Jew, but he didn't want you to be too Jewish. And he saw the changes that I was making, and he did not like them. But we got my father connected to Zalman as well, and they also came for Shabbos and met. And do you have any memories of meeting my father?
I remember it finally, because it was after weeks of trying to get him to listen, because his schedule was doctor in the hospital and always worked the weekends. So he finally came over, and we had a wonderful Shabbat dinner. I vividly remember on the way out, he turned to me and said, Zalman, tonight is changing my life.
Wow. As my journey continued, my father and mother, and actually both of my siblings, all became observant and joined me in this beautiful life that we've had. And over the years, we lost a little bit of touch. Our lives kind of continued. We got to reconnect with the Grossbaums when LifeTown came to life, and so proud of everything that you continue to do here.
Can I pause for a second? We're so proud of Allison. She runs an incredible organization called Jew in the City, and everything that you do bring light, beautiful light, to the Jewish community. It's amazing. I'm so proud of
you. And I did promise you a wink. You may be wondering at this point, we have one story, we have another story, but what is the connection? So about a year ago, my parents had gotten into some genealogy work. They kind of dabbled in trying to figure out their roots a little while back. One of my coworkers' husbands was kind of doing genealogy on the side. He decided to do it as a full-time job. And I said to my parents, I think you should, take this project on right now. He could use a little business. He's very talented. And so my parents began going down this road and discovering all these long-lost relatives that were, far away in the past and, across time. And my father reconnected with a first cousin, a cousin that he had not spoken to probably in close to 50 years. Now, the question is, how do you lose touch with a first cousin? So my father's uncle had passed away tragically in his 30s, and his aunt, moved away with the kids, and so they lost touch and hadn't seen each other in quite some time. And when my father reached out to learn more about this cousin, do you have any pictures? Do you have any family tree work? He found out that his cousin Michael had gotten connected also to a man named Zalman Grossbaum. And my father said to him that Zalman saved your life physically, and he helped save our lives spiritually. And the thing is that 50 years is a long time for cousins to not see each other. And so my parents just happened to be driving into New Jersey today. So, Daddy, do you want to come up and see your cousin? That's Alan.
This is not true.
He has the DNA to prove it.
Well, I wasn't expecting to speak this evening, but when I heard this event was taking place, I certainly had to show up for it. Last time I saw my cousin Michael was probably around 1972 or so. My wife and I, we weren't even married at the time. We were visiting my grandparents in Miami Beach, and I know that Michael had a very fond feeling for my father, Uncle Jerome, and he came up to see him, and I think that's the last time we saw one another. And but then when I heard the story, when we made contact, and then I heard the story about who your donor was, it was again certainly a wink from Hashem. So anyway, let's try to keep it.
Don't wait 50 more years.
Okay.
I've never met Michael before in my life either, so I had to keep this a secret for a little while.
And I did this all day. I'm sorry.
So Michael, it's all come full circle. What do you think?
Tell me what I think. I'm dumbfounded on so many different levels. But what Zalman took my wife and I on a tour, and I knew the work that they did. I didn't know the work that all of you did. But this is, you guys have climbed a mountain, and you keep on climbing, and my heart and head and my soul go out to you for all the wonderful stuff that you do. And to repeat something that Zalman said early on, getting swabbed is so easy. It's so nothing. I'm here only because Zalman did it many years ago, and that's my life. It saved my life. It allowed me to have more years with my bride. It had allowed me to have time with my children and 6 wonderful grandchildren, and it's all because he woke up one day and decided to go down to a place and get swabbed, and then when the call came, he showed up and put his arms out, and so I ask you all, put your arms out and do the same thing.
You know, one of the blessings in life, you know, there's times when you might say hello to somebody, you've changed their life. There's times when you might do a kind deed and not realize the impact. To me, this is such a blessing that I get to see the connection of generations, of just years and years of things. And every time we talk, we find another layer of our connection, because we are all connected. And all we need to do is literally put out a hand, and God will do the rest. Thank you all so much for everything you guys do every single day.
And thanks so much for letting us share this story. It was something that we, sort of heard amongst ourselves, but it's a story that should be shared far and wide. And thank you so much for listening. And I hope you'll get to see the ripple effects of the work that you've done and the beautiful work that you do.
Thank you.